Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world. I do hope you're doing exceedingly well, and so much love to each and every one of you. But before we get started with tonight's story, don't forget to go and get yourself a lovely hot drink. And if it's very hot, go and get yourself a lovely cold drink of lemonade or whatever it is that you fancy, because I've got a fabulous story for you tonight. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Posy, and I'm from the copper state called Arizona, which is a southwestern state in the United States, best known for the Grand Canyon, bordered by California to the west, Nevada to the northwest, Utah to the north, New Mexico to the east, and the Mexican state of Sonora to the south. The Colorado River forms the boundary between California and Nevada. Our geography in this part of the world is so diverse, comprising volcanic mountains, deep canyons, plateaus and deserts, to snowy mountains. I'm from the city of Flagstaff, which is surrounded by mountains, deserts and ponderosa pine forests, and I grew up here in a lovely neighbourhood close to downtown Flagstaff, where I was raised in a ranch-style home by both of my parents as a single child. I did, of course, have a distinct advantage, as I was spoiled rotten, especially by my grandfather, Gramps, who considered me the apple of his eye. Growing up, I was very fortunate because my grandfather lived in our home from when I was knee-high to a grasshopper, as my grandmother had died before I was born due to complications during a standard surgical procedure that went awry. As a young child, I adored Gramps, especially him being around all the time, as he was always there for me when I returned back from school, and of course during the school holidays. He was the one that took me to the ice cream parlour after school, or the one who nursed my grazed knee better after I fell off my bike, or the one that helped me with my homework, or told me a bedtime story before I went back to bed. Both my parents worked in the town of Flagstaff and were home by 5 o'clock every day, and much as I loved them, it was my grandfather who was an ever constant in my life, and was always around when it mattered, as far as I was concerned, and that's what really counts. One day when I was 17 years old, my Gramps told me an incredulous, outlandish story that was so extraordinary it sounded almost bizarre. He swore to me it was true. My grandfather was not the type to fabricate stories or to make up things, so I believe his amazing tale, and this is what he told me. It was in 1978 when I visited the Petrified National Park in Arizona with your grandmother. And that was when all our troubles began. The park is full of petrified trees from redwoods to ginkgo and other extinct species of trees millions of years old, and it's also known for its fossils. I had heard rumours that stealing a piece of the petrified wood from the park would ultimately lead to a curse that would cause an excessive amount of bad luck. At the time, I dismissed the rumours as the park's very clever way to discourage people from stealing the petrified wood. Your grandmother was incredibly superstitious and begged me not to even take a tiny sliver of the wood, but I stumbled across a very attractive, colourful piece and surreptitiously put it into my pocket, thinking that she would be none the wiser. Besides, what harm could it possibly do, I thought. I'd never been superstitious, so I wasn't bothered by my actions. I got into the car, and before we even returned home, I had a flat tyre. Now that never happened. My wife looked at me indignantly, with a frown growing on her face, and she said, "You took a piece of that petrified wood, didn't you? Since when does a brand new car like ours, with brand new tyres, just suddenly get a flat tyre like this, for no apparent reason?" Even I have to admit, I was flummoxed by what had happened. Of course, I denied to her that I had taken a piece of petrified wood, and just put it all down to coincidence. But when we returned home that night, I surreptitiously slipped the wood into my bedside table and went to sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night to sense a very malevolent evil presence in my bedroom, which was decidedly odd, as I had no belief whatsoever in the paranormal. I could feel insidiously evil eyes staring at me, but I could see nothing there. I became increasingly uneasy and overwrought. I reassured myself that I must be imagining things and went quickly back to sleep, only to awaken in the middle of the night, struggling for breath and feeling a very hefty, heavy pressure upon my chest. I beheld a diabolical, evil old hag with red eyes pressing down on my chest so very hard, with a malevolent grin upon her wicked face. The startling part of it all is that she seemed so real and solid like you or I. I was powerless to even move a muscle of my body, and after a few moments she vaporized before my very eyes in what seemed like a whiff of smoke, and was gone from my sight. I felt as if I'd been submerged under water for a long time, and was not able to breathe. So I remember coughing up copious amounts of water, really as if I had been drowning in a pool. It was decidedly bizarre. A few hours later, at 2 o'clock in the morning, when the telephone began to ring and ring, I didn't answer it for a while. I had a huge inkling that I was about to hear some grim, really unwelcome, horrifying news, and I wasn't wrong. I was informed by my best friend's wife that Pete, my very best friend, had been run over crossing the road during the night to get a takeaway. I put down the receiver and stared blankly at the walls, and it was like my grievous tears became frozen. I was so traumatized that I wasn't able to cry at all. It was as if my afflicted emotions had become anesthetized. I was benumbed by the shock of what I'd just heard. The following days things were, I'm glad to say, normal, and nothing seemed to go wrong, but there was such a looming heaviness over my life. It was almost like I had physically gained over 600 pounds in an instant, because I felt weighed down by everything that I did, and it became such an effort. I must admit I was very scared to go to bed every night. I dreaded the idea of that mysterious hag returning. So I stayed awake, and I swear you that I physically saw oppressive, looming dark shadows moving in and out of my bedroom walls. I mean, I'm not talking about just shadows, I'm talking about real shadow people. And they were watching me. But they were so dark I couldn't discern their eyes, but I could feel them, for they were like daggers, those eyes, going right through you. They gave you the sense of foreboding, and it was just awful. I wanted to scream, but I held my tongue because I didn't want to startle your grandmother, who was fast asleep at the time. The next morning it was your grandmother's routine surgery that required a minor anaesthetic, which wasn't anything to really worry about. But since I'd got that piece of wood, things in my life had certainly started to go wrong. So I begged your grandmother not to go through with the surgery, and she said, "Why should I worry about a standard procedure like this? It's not as if you brought any of that cursed wood back with you from the forests, did you?" I'm ashamed to admit that I didn't want to admit to your grandmother that I had betrayed her trust, and that I'd actually pinched a piece of that wood. I reassured myself that there was no way that anything could go wrong for a standard procedure like this. I was waiting in the reception area later that day when the doctor called me over to one of the consulting rooms, and then I knew that something was very seriously wrong. The poor man was trembling so much, and his face was very stern and grim. He said, "Mr. Bellingham, I am very, very sorry. We did everything we could to save your wife, but sadly and very tragically she passed away. We believe she had negative reactions to the anaesthetic. This has never happened to us before, and we are very sorry indeed." Well, when I lost your grandmother, my world fell apart. I was a broken, very traumatized man who felt responsible for my wife's death. I knew I had to get in touch with a psychic to ask what I should do about the piece of petrified wood that I'd stolen from the forest, because I now knew that it was cursed. I didn't believe it. I knew it. I was phoning to make an appointment with her when she said, "Mr. Bellingham, I don't want you to come to my house, for I fear the negative repercussions from your visit. You have something in your possession that is resonating at a very low frequency, and it has brought your vibration to a very low level indeed. This means it's a magnet to all things evil and dark. You are attracting dark negative forces to yourself like moths to a light, as like attracts like. You need to put this possession in a locked copper box to ground it, and never expose it to the light of day ever again. And then your frequency will return to normal after about 24 to 48 hours. So I did everything the psychic told me to do. And like clockwork, my life returned to normal. Within 2 days, things began to get good again, and I was no longer visited by that hag, nor did I encounter those dark, shadowy figures in the walls. So that was the story that my grandfather told me. Fast forward to the summer of 2005, after my grandfather tragically passed away. As you can imagine, I was completely devastated. This was after a long, drawn-out illness. I was going to take his ashes to Redwood National Park in California, where he wanted to be scattered, as he adored those redwood trees. My best friend and I drove there, and in the glove compartment of my car, I had my grandfather's little copper container that housed the cursed piece of wood. I had brought it along in the car with me to tell Susan all about it, as she loved all things esoteric and outer-worldly, and I thought it would be an interesting conversation piece. "Thanks, Susan," I said as she climbed into the seat next to mine. "I'm so grateful that you're coming with me on this trip. I really could do with the company." "Are you kidding?" she said. "I wouldn't miss it for the entire world. Do you know how long I've wanted to see one of those redwood trees? I've heard so many incredible reports about the Redwood Park in California and how beautiful it is. I've always wanted to hug a 2,000-year-old tree and feel its energy." "Why did your grandfather want to be scattered there of all places?" she asked me curiously. "He wanted to be buried with the redwoods because they're the tallest trees in the world and therefore the closest trees to heaven. That's how he saw it." "I didn't know that your grandfather was spiritual or even religious," she said. "Well, he became that way after he realised that there was a spiritual realm, because he has encountered demonic beings in his life, and so he knows now that that is not all there is." "Now that is intriguing," said Susan, getting excited. "Did your grandfather tell you about his incredible experiences of the paranormal? Because if he did, please tell me. You know how fascinated I am by the beguiling world of the mysterious and all things that defy rational explanation. Well then, I might have something of interest to show you. If you open my glove compartment, you'll find a copper container in there. But whatever you do, don't open it up, because it's cursed." "Are you being serious?" said Susan, looking enthralled. "Why on earth are you carrying it in the car with you then? Are you completely mad?" She began to read the inscription on the copper container, which read, "In God we place our trust." "I just wanted to show it to you. As long as you don't open it, it's fine. I like keeping it around me. It reminds me of Gramps, and of course the incredible story he told me." "What's in it?" said Susan, beginning to shake the container vigorously, like a box of Smarties. "Please don't do that, Susan. Don't shake the container, I mean. It's a piece of petrified wood that's cursed. That's what it is." "Wow," said Susan. "Tell me all about it." I began to tell Susan my grandfather's mysterious story, and she hung on to every word, with her eyes growing as wide as saucers and her mouth hanging open. She was absolutely astonished. "Do you actually think the curse is true?" she asked me. "Or do you think your Gramps has just had a string of bad luck that coincided with getting the petrified wood? I mean, there can be plausible explanations for outer-worldly stuff, like hallucinatory drugs, too much gin, or a bad hangover. You'll be surprised how things like that can appear supernatural when they're not. I just think it's good to look at things with discerning eyes when you assess anything." "I do think it's a genuine curse," I assured her. "I've done some extensive research on the subject. Do you know, over the years, the National Park in Arizona has had hundreds and hundreds of letters from people apologising for stealing the wood, exclaiming how since they stole a piece of the petrified wood, their lives were turned upside down and everything went wrong from thenceforth. Apparently they have hundreds of these letters on file. I do gather that remorseful people who regret stealing some of that wood send it straight back to the park, giving specific details of the location from whence they can actually find the piece. But unfortunately for them, the park doesn't put it back, as it contaminates the site for research purposes." "You know, I'm not being funny," said Susan, "but my bet is that people heard about the curse, visited the park and stole a piece of the wood, and psychosomatically manifested bad things in their lives. Maybe they blamed a sudden death or a bad relationship on the wood. It's the perfect excuse not to take any responsibility for failing at your marriage or losing your job. You can just say it all went wrong because you took the cursed wood from the petrified forest. You surprise me, Susan, I said. I thought you, of all people, would believe in the curse, with your huge interest in outer-worldly phenomena. Of course I'm fascinated in things that can't be explained. I admit that it's true, said Susan. But I'd like to reiterate that I choose to look at things from a skeptic's angle. I like to rule out every conceivable possibility before I'll agree that something is true. All too often you hear of people claiming that they're being spooked by ghostly noises in an attic, and it's just a family of rats scampering around in the roof. That happens to paranormal researchers all the time. You hear of it. As I keep telling you until I'm blue in the face, sometimes paranormal phenomena can actually have a rational explanation. You need to rule everything out first. So you're saying all the weird things that happened to my Gramps could have a natural explanation? That's exactly what I'm saying. Everything that happened to him could have been preordained in the first place. Maybe it was meant to happen. I'm not sure I buy into that theory, I said. It was a very long, gruelling 17-hour trek to the Redwood State Park, for at the very best of times I've never relished whiling away the tedious long hours stuck behind the wheel, listening to music from my stereo system, however good it might be. Thankfully we chose to stay overnight at a very agreeable cosy bed and breakfast, where we were welcomed by our convivial hosts, who were exceedingly accommodating to us. There's something about southern hospitality that you can't match. It was a very good decision to cut the journey in half, and after a restful night's sleep in a comfortable, somewhat lumpy bed, we arose early the following morning and eagerly proceeded upon our way, enjoying the scenic vistas from our car window, from pretty flowering meadows to quaint barns or fields of corn and groves of oranges or lemons, or the odd field of galloping horses or grazing cows. Before long we arrived in California. I brought a large bunch of pretty roses to throw out over the area where I was going to scatter my Gramps' ashes. I had never visited the Redwood National Park in California before, and I have to say I hadn't anticipated how mesmerizing it actually would be. I've never spent so much time looking up towards the sky in my whole life, staring up in wondrous awe at the tallest beings on earth, between 200 to 400 feet tall. Some of these trees can live up to 2,000 years or more. Susan and I were beguiled and bedazzled by the magnificence and splendour of these trees, and every 2 seconds it would seem Susan would have her arms around a redwood tree. Only the problem was she couldn't get them completely around its girth, because these things were enormous. I can't believe how old these trees are, she told me. They've been here for centuries and seen things we haven't seen. It's like they're holding on to all the secret knowledge within the very fabric of their bark. I hadn't thought of it that way, I said. Looking at the forest, I could quite comprehend why Gramps wanted his ashes scattered here, as it was such a magical, mysterious place, with these tall, statuesque skyscrapers that reached to the heavens like graceful dancers. I just loved the way the sunlight twinkled between their elegant, outstretched boughs, dappling the floor with such an ethereal, subtle light that also played its quintessential part in bespeckling the forest ferns with different shades of light that even a light engineer would have difficulty in replicating, for indeed the forest was like a bedazzling emerald wonderland. My grandfather had requested me to be guided by my instincts as to where I wanted to scatter his ashes, and soon within an hour on the trail I found a redwood tree that was unique in every single way. I loved the girth and the shape of its trunk and the scarred areas on its bark that were filled with an abundance of green leaves. It was like I knew with a certainty that this was the idyllic area to scatter my Gramps' ashes. As ironic as it sounds, I almost felt as if my grandfather was whispering to my heart that this was the spot. "I'll miss you, Gramps," I said, throwing the ashes around the tree and watching the dust vaporize in the air and settle on the ground. I could taste the salt of my tears as they rolled down my cheeks. I began to sprinkle the ground with pretty petals from the roses I'd brought along with me, so that the redwood tree was carpeted in colourful confetti. "Are you all right?" asked Susan, looking at me with a deep look of concern upon her face. "I'll be fine," I said, pulling out my tissue from my pocket and blowing my nose furiously. "It's just very emotional letting go of Gramps. He was such an intrinsic and special part of my life. I feel as if I'm letting go of my very best friend." "I know it can't be easy," said Susan, giving me an encouraging nudge. "But I'm sure Gramps would be very proud of your courage today." All of a sudden I could sense that foreboding feeling that Susan and I were not alone. I discerned that something was watching us. I knew that Susan felt it too, because her face became as white as a sheet, and I could see she was trembling. "There's someone behind that redwood tree over there," she told me. "I saw the head, and whatever it wasn't completely human, but it has been staring at us for quite a while. It's giving me the heebie-jeebies. Look how my hands are shaking." I glanced towards the tree, and I saw it too. The shadowy dark head was peering at both of us, and then whatever it was glided behind one tree towards another, and then another. And that was when we saw it. I could hardly believe it. My eyes grew as round as saucers, and my jaws dropped to the ground. It would seem that even this powerful giant seemed dwarfed by the tree. I was astonished as we were staring at Bigfoot, the critter that for so long I had relegated to the realms of the fictitious as far as I was concerned. I had secretly concluded to myself that anyone who believed in such a spurious being was not of sound mind. Yet the critter was making its presence known to me, and I sensed it wanted to be seen by us. I was always under the impression the creature was elusive and evasive, so what on earth did it want with us, I wondered, and why was it giving us its undivided attention? I was not afraid of the Bigfoot, although I should have been, given its great size and girth, for I'm not exaggerating when I say it was easily between 7 to 8 foot tall, and 3 foot wide across the chest area, and possibly between 600 to 700 pounds. But please don't take me literally on these facts, because they're just estimates based on my perception. I do know the critter was covered in silky grey hair that gleamed. Its head was distinctly cone-shaped, and it did have a neck that was thick and small, but was almost invisible buried beneath the layers of thick hair. I've heard people describe Bigfoot as like an ape-man, and I do understand where they're coming from. However, in my opinion, this critter was more like a wild man than an ape, as its face was distinctly human. I will say that the ape-like aspects of the creature were seen in its overlong arms and powerful sinewy body, and the strange shape of its head. For a moment the critter stared up at us with deep-set treacle eyes, as if it was looking right into the depths of my very soul, and I'm certain it was reading my thoughts. I then heard the words in my head, "Don't do it, it's bad energy." I continued to stare at the critter, and I noticed that Susan looked petrified, for she was shaking like a jelly, and her eyes were as wide as saucers. The critter then turned around and vanished from our sight. 1 minute he was there, and then he was gone. I looked at Susan in astonishment and said, "Did we see that, or were my eyes deceiving me?" Susan began to compose herself. "If you mean, did we see a Bigfoot? Well, yes, we did." As we made our way back to the car, Susan and I were at a loss for words. It was as if we were in some kind of a hypnotic trance. We even passed people along the trail, and barely noticed anyone at all, nor did we stop to admire the rest of the redwoods that had intrigued us so much. We returned to the car, and Susan reclined into her seat and looked at me with a peculiar expression upon her face that I can only describe as befuddled. "What?" I asked, taking a sip of water from my bottle. "What?" "The Bigfoot spoke to me," she said. "The Bigfoot spoke to you," I said. "That's right," she said. "In my head. You know, like telepathic communication." "It spoke to me too," I said. I reached into my glove compartment to get out a piece of paper and a pen. "I want you to write out on this piece of paper what it said to you, and I'll do exactly the same with mine, and we'll compare notes." We couldn't believe it, as both our notes said the same thing. "Don't do it. It's bad energy." "Wow," I said. "The Bigfoot gave us both the same message. That's extraordinary. I wonder what on earth it can be." "I have a confession to make," admitted Susan. On the way in the car, when you handed me the copper box to examine, containing the cursed piece of petrified wood, I did find myself grappling with my conscience, wondering whether I should open it or not. I wanted to see if the curse was actually true. "But you didn't do it," I said. "You wouldn't be so crazy, surely. Not after I told you what happened with my grandfather." "I was going to," said Susan. "But I told myself that once you'd scattered the ashes, I would return to the car and open the copper container without your knowing about it, and keep the wood in my pocket, just to see if anything bad would happen to us. You see, I really believed that the curse was just a bunch of baloney. Otherwise, I wouldn't have considered taking that risk." "Have you lost your mind, Susan?" I barked. "Why would you even consider tempting fate? You're asking for trouble. It's like playing with fire and hoping that you're not going to get burnt. It's pure and utter madness. I'm not going to do it any more, not after the message from that Bigfoot." "Damn right you're not going to," I said, reaching out for the copper container and stuffing it into my handbag. "I knew I shouldn't have brought it along." "I'm so sorry," said Susan. "I truly am. I don't know what I was thinking." "Well, more to the point," I said, "what I don't understand is how the Bigfoot knew about the petrified wood. It was almost as if my grandfather was using him to communicate that message to us. This is the weirdest, most outlandish thing that has ever happened to me." "Well, maybe the Bigfoot can read vibrations," suggested Susan, "and sensed we had this negative energy tucked in a copper box in our car." "Well, I suppose that's a possibility," I said. "Were you thinking about what you planned to do when you returned to the car?" I asked. "Yes," Susan admitted. "I was wrestling with those thoughts. Should I open it? Shouldn't I? Supposing the curse is true? Supposing it is? Those kinds of thoughts were going around in my head. But I did reach the decision I was going to open the box at some point." "You know something, Susan," I said. "With your esoteric knowledge and wisdom, I thought you would be the responsible one when dealing with outer-worldly stuff, but it seems I'm wrong." "Well, what just happened with that Bigfoot has certainly given me pause for thought," she admitted. "I'm now inclined to believe the curse of the petrified wood is true." Well, 15 years have passed since I last scattered my Gramps' ashes at the Redwood Park. I often ponder what the ramifications would have been should Susan have opened the copper container that I still have today. I will never open it to find out whether the curse is true or not, for indeed hundreds of people have visited the petrified forest in Arizona and have reported their lives going awry after stealing a piece of the wood from that park. Are they all delusional, or is there more to the story than meets the eye? I'm just so grateful that a Bigfoot brought Susan to her senses and stepped out of his comfort zone to warn us about it. If you happen to visit the petrified forest in Arizona, do me a favour and take my advice. Please don't steal a piece of the petrified wood. It may be very beautiful, but a rose can come with many thorns, and in my opinion, it's not worth the risk. I gather you can actually buy a piece of petrified wood from the gift shop if you want to. I haven't heard any negative reports of acquiring it in an honest legal way, so if you really want to, get it that way. But I'm not sure I'd even be tempted to buy it myself. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an amazing story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.